The flight attendant threatened to have him moved from his seat without knowing the man she was threatening owned the entire airline. Before we get into the story, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Laurel Wade had a gift. She would not have called it that herself. She would have called it 4 years of frontline experience, calibrated instincts, and a healthy respect for the fact that first class was first class for a reason. But her colleague Taryn called it the radar, and the name had stuck. The radar worked like this. Laurel could assess a passenger in under 30 seconds. Posture, shoes, the way they held their boarding pass, whether they paused in the aisle or moved through it, with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. She could tell a nervous first-time flyer from a road warrior executive, a honeymooner from a grieving relative, someone who belonged in business class from someone who very clearly did not. In 4 years with Ashmore Airways, the radar had never been wrong. Until a Tuesday morning in October, Flight 204 from Toronto to Vancouver, when a man with a duct-taped backpack stepped through the boarding door into the first-class cabin, and Laurel's entire belief system began to quietly dismantle itself. She spotted him before he'd cleared the galley, unwashed dark hair in genuine need of a cut, a beard that had stopped being a style choice about 3 weeks ago and was now simply a fact of nature. Gray hoodie with a small tear at the collar, worn jeans, hiking boots with dried mud still on the left sole, which, in first class, bordered on an act of aggression. He was squinting at his boarding pass like it was written in a language he mostly understood. Laurel followed him to row 2. "Excuse me, sir." She kept her voice low, pleasant, the particular kind of pleasant that was doing considerable heavy lifting. "I just want to confirm you're in the right area. This is the first-class cabin." The man looked up. He had blue-gray eyes that were very calm, the kind of calm that comes from either extreme confidence or extreme indifference, and Laurel wasn't certain which. "I know," he said. 2A. "Right," she smiled. "And your boarding pass?" He handed it over without ceremony. She examined it the way a pharmacist might examine a suspicious prescription. Kieran Ashmore, seat 2A, business select, full fare, every code checked. She ran it through the scanner for good measure. Valid. She handed it back. "Wonderful," she said, in a tone that communicated the opposite. "Can I get you anything to start?" What Laurel Wade did not know, could not have known, because the booking had been made without any advance crew notification, by precise and deliberate instruction, was that Kieran Ashmore had boarded this aircraft because he owned it. Not this specific aircraft, though technically he owned that too. He owned Ashmore Airways, all 47 planes, 14 routes, 3 terminal lounges in 3 cities, the catering contracts, the ground crews, the mobile app that had just won an Industry Design Award, and as of 11 days ago, a new subsidiary operating out of Halifax. He had not told anyone at the airline he would be traveling today. His assistant Dale had booked the ticket under his actual name because Kieran had told him specifically not to flag it. No upgrade notification, no advance crew briefing, no red carpet welcome. He wanted to travel like a regular passenger and observe what that actually felt like. He had been reviewing customer satisfaction reports for 6 months, and the same phrase kept appearing across hundreds of responses. The service is technically correct, but somehow feels cold. He wanted to understand what that meant. He had not anticipated the demonstration would begin within 90 seconds of boarding. Back in the galley, Laurel murmured to Taryn, "Row 2A, keep an eye." Taryn looked. "He seems fine." "He looks like he found the ticket in a coin return." Laurel. Professional vigilance, that's all. Kieran, who had excellent hearing and had caught roughly half of this conversation, opened his black notebook and wrote, "Crew preconceptions active within 90 seconds. Passenger appearance drying service assumptions before any interaction. Priority item for training review." He underlined the last 3 words. Laurel returned to row 2 during the pre-departure service, carrying a small tray of sparkling water and juice with the practiced grace of someone who had done this perhaps 10,000 times. She set a glass in front of Kieran. He was reading the menu card with a faintly puzzled expression, and she made a decision she would later describe to Taryn as a small act of passenger welfare. "Is this your first time in business class?" she asked, entirely non-judgmentally. Kieran looked up, something like that. It can feel like a lot at first. She pointed to the menu with her pen. The salmon is the safer option for a 2-hour flight. The beef service runs long and you'll lose 20 minutes to the landing. And the cutlery, she gestured at the arrangement beside his tray, goes outside in. The small fork first, then the main. The cabin crew pays attention to these things. She delivered this with total sincerity, the way a civic volunteer might walk a tourist through a museum. Kieran studied the cutlery layout. Then he studied Laurel. "That's genuinely helpful," he said, and his voice was warm enough that she almost relaxed. Almost. "Also," she added, dropping her voice, "the Ashmore Select Lounge in Vancouver. If this is your first time using it, don't hesitate at the entrance. The host will ask for your card separately if you pause, and it can get a bit awkward." Kieran nodded. "Act like I've been before." Exactly. He had designed the lounge himself. He had personally selected the chair upholstery after 3 rounds of sampling. In his notebook he wrote, "Crew offering unsolicited social guidance to passenger, based entirely on appearance. No malice but no awareness either. This is the gap." The flight left Pearson at 9:15, the Toronto skyline falling away under a low October sky, Lake Ontario spreading wide and silver below. Laurel worked the cabin with her usual efficiency, refilling glasses, collecting trays, answering the reading light in 3C with the specific patience of someone who had answered that light from that seat approximately 40 times in the past year. She checked on row 2 more than she strictly needed to. By the 40-minute mark, she had noted, he declined the champagne, asked for black coffee with no sugar, and taken consistent notes in his small black notebook, which she found either suspicious or eccentric. She had not yet decided which. He had also used the correct fork entirely on his own, without appearing to think about it, which mildly annoyed her. When she came by to clear the tray, she noticed he had barely touched the salmon. "You're not eating," she said. "I had something before boarding." Laurel looked at him, really looked, the way she did with passengers who seemed unwell. He was a little pale, or perhaps that was the cabin lighting. Either way. "You don't look like you did," she said, and then heard herself and corrected course. "I mean, it's a long travel day. You should eat." She reached into the small pocket of her uniform blazer and produced a granola bar, honey and oat, slightly bent from living in that pocket since a layover in Edmonton the previous week. She set it on his tray table. "It's not on the menu, but go ahead." Kieran looked at the granola bar for a moment that lasted long enough to make Laurel mildly self-conscious. "It's complimentary," she added, "no charge." "I know," he said quietly, "thank you." He picked it up and ate it without ceremony, the way someone does when they are actually hungry and not performing gratitude. And Laurel went back to the galley with an odd, small feeling she couldn't quite name. In his notebook, Kieran wrote, "L. Wade offered personal snack from her own pocket. Unprompted, no audience, just noticed I hadn't eaten." He paused, pen hovering. Then he wrote, "When did someone last do something like that without wanting anything?" He didn't underline it. He left it alone. The trouble began 40 minutes outside Vancouver. Captain Renault, 15-year Ashmore veteran, attendee of 3 company galas and the Halifax terminal opening, and a man who had shaken Kieran Ashmore's hand enough times to recognize him at 30 paces even with a beard and a broken-in hoodie, emerged from the flight deck for a standard cabin walk. He was passing row 2 when he registered who was sitting in it, and his face performed the controlled double take of a pilot who had been trained never to look surprised. "Mr. Ashmore," Captain Renault said, pausing at the row. "Didn't realize you'd be on board today. How are you finding the service?" Laurel, 2 rows back with a recycling bag, went entirely still. Kieran glanced toward her. "Excellent," he said carefully. "Very attentive crew." "Glad to hear it." Captain Renault nodded and moved toward the flight deck. Laurel walked to row 2, slowly. She stood at the edge of his seat. "The pilot just called you Mr. Ashmore," she said. "He did. That's your name." "Yes." "He must have confused you with someone." Kieran looked out the window at the mountains beginning to gather below. "Probably," he said. "It happens." Laurel went back to the galley and said to Taryn, very quietly. The captain greeted the 2A passenger by name. "Do you think he's famous?" Taryn reached for her phone. "Don't," Laurel said. "Why not?" Because I don't want to give him the satisfaction of looking him up. Taryn put the phone away. Then she picked it up again while Laurel's back was turned, typed something, and her eyebrows climbed steadily toward her hairline. She said nothing. Laurel would have to arrive at this destination on her own. With 15 minutes to descent, Laurel stopped by row 2 one final time. She had a thought, a kind, professional, entirely well-intentioned thought. "When we land," she said, "and you're going through to the lounge, I know you said you've been before, but honestly, if you feel unsure at any point, just ask the host for the standard arrival package. They keep things simple for first-time members." Kieran looked at her. "I'll keep that in mind. Also, the espresso bar is on the left when you walk in. Don't wait at the main counter. It's actually a check-in point, not a service counter. Easy mistake." "I've made that mistake before," he agreed. She nodded, satisfied. "And one more thing. If anyone asks how often you fly with us, just say regularly. It lands better than a specific number." Kieran looked out the window. The mountains were very close now. "Laurel," he said. "Yes?" "How long have you worked for Ashmore Airways?" 4 years. "And in 4 years," he said, "did you ever wonder who started the airline?" There was a pause. "I assumed it was someone named Ashmore," she said. The wheels touched down smooth and clean. The cabin lights came up. Laurel stood at the boarding door for deplaning, delivering her standard farewell to each passenger. When Kieran reached her, he stopped. "The granola bar," he said. "Genuinely, best thing I've eaten on a flight in years." A brief pause. "I travel quite a lot." She opened her mouth to say something, and closed it, and opened it again. He was already moving down the jetway, backpack over one shoulder, entirely unhurried. Laurel saw off the remaining passengers. She collected her paperwork. She walked through the terminal toward the crew check-in point, thinking about noodles and whether the restaurant near the layover hotel would still be open. She was not thinking about Kieran Ashmore. For approximately 9 minutes. Then she was standing at the crew check-in counter with her phone in her hand, and her thumb was moving before she'd made a conscious decision, and she was typing his name into the search bar the way you might test a stove burner you're almost certain is off. The first result was Forbes Canada. Kieran Ashmore, 38, founder and CEO, Ashmore Airways, net worth approximately $2.1 billion CAD. Named one of Canada's top 40 under 40, quietly transformed a regional carrier into one of the country's fastest-growing private airlines in under a decade. There was a photograph, a formal headshot, clean-shaven, haircut, a suit that cost more than her car. The eyes were the same. Laurel looked up from her phone. The Vancouver terminal went about its business with complete indifference. Overhead, across the departures board, the Ashmore Airways lettering was enormous and blue and suddenly very loud. She had told the man who owned this airline which fork to use. She had explained to him how to act in his own lounge. She had given him a granola bar because he looked pale. She sat down on a bench near Gate 14 and looked at the carpet for a while. Then she stood up. She straightened her blazer. She walked toward the Ashmore Select Lounge with her crew access card already in hand because she had something to say, and she was going to say it while she still had the nerve. The lounge was warm and unhurried, navy leather, forest green accents, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, the kind of space that made you feel, without trying, that everything was probably going to be fine. Kieran was near the windows. His backpack was on the floor. His notebook was closed. He had a real coffee now, and he was on the phone, the low-focused voice of someone used to being listened to. He saw her come in and acknowledged her with a slight tilt of his head. He ended the call. "You Googled me," he said. "I did," Laurel said. She sat across from him and then realized she'd sat without being invited, and decided the time for worrying about that was past. "I need to apologize." "All right. What I said on the flight, the cutlery, the lounge, the whole thing. I was judging you based on your appearance and it was wrong. It was unkind and it was unprofessional. I'm sorry." Kieran was quiet for a moment, the way someone is quiet when they're deciding how much of what they're thinking to say. "You're apologizing," he said, "not because you're worried about your position." "I don't know what's happening with my position," Laurel said. "I'm apologizing because I was rude to a person who didn't deserve it, and that's true regardless of who you are." He looked at her steadily. Then he turned his coffee cup once in its saucer. "I've been receiving passenger feedback reports for 6 months," he said. "Same phrase shows up constantly. Technically correct, but somehow cold. I flew today to try to understand what that meant." He paused. "In 3 hours, you showed me more than the reports managed in half a year." Laurel said nothing. "The granola bar," Kieran said. "You handed me your own food because you thought I hadn't eaten. Not because I was a VIP, not because there was anything to gain." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was harder to name. When was the last time someone just noticed that? Without wanting anything in return? She didn't answer. She didn't have one. "I have a proposal," he said, and opened the notebook. He turned it toward her. The pages were dense with observations, specific, fair-minded, honest in the way only someone who genuinely cared about the outcome would bother to be. "I'm building a passenger experience program, real reform. Not a rebranding. I need someone who understands service at the level you do, the actual human mechanics of it, not the language of a corporate deck." Laurel read 2 pages. She read them carefully. "You'd lead the training redesign," he said, "with full autonomy on the content, properly compensated, not a favor." "I told you which fork to use," she said. "And you were not wrong that I knew. But you also gave me your own food and didn't make a production of it." He leaned forward slightly. "That's not something I can write into a manual. That instinct you have, even when you aim it in the wrong direction, I need it on this project." The afternoon light was cutting long across the carpet. Outside the lounge windows, an Ashmore Airways plane was pushing back from its gate, the blue and white tail bright against the gray October sky. Laurel set the notebook down. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, the near approach of one. "Of course. I keep my flight schedule through the spring. I'm not giving up my seniority while we see if this actually works." "Done. I write the training content. Input welcome, but the final voice is mine. If I think something's off, I say so." "I'd want nothing else." She looked at the window. "And no one refers to this as the receptionist who taught the CEO good manners. Because I'm aware that's going to be someone's instinct, and I'm telling you now." A pause. Then agreed, though for the record, it's not the worst origin story. Laurel almost smiled. She stopped it, mostly out of principle. "This part," she said, touching a page in his notebook. "Crew hesitant to make eye contact during boarding. Interaction feels transactional. That's a training gap. It's not a personality problem, it's fixable." "Show me how," Kieran said. That was, more or less, how it started. What neither of them mentioned in the lounge, or in the dozen conversations that followed through November and into December, what took considerably longer to surface, was the other part, the part that had nothing to do with service methodology. It was Taryn who said it first, during a Calgary layover, when Laurel was on her 3rd attempt to explain why she habitually reread certain work messages before bed. "You like him," Taryn said. "We have a professional collaboration. You sent him a list of Canadian musicians to listen to on long-haul flights. It was a cultural resource document." Laurel looked at the window of the hotel bar. "He grew up in Thunder Bay," she said after a moment. "His dad drove a school bus. His mum worked at a paper mill. He bought his first plane on a government loan and slept in the hangar for 18 months. She paused. "He flew in a torn hoodie, because he actually doesn't care about any of the trappings. He cares about whether the coffee is good, and whether the crew feels like the work matters, and whether people leave the plane having experienced something worth remembering." She stopped. "I spent 4 years reading passengers in 30 seconds. I had him completely wrong." Taryn said nothing for a beat. "He's also the CEO of the airline you work for," she offered. "Which makes it professionally fascinating," Laurel said. "Is that what we're calling it?" "That's what we're calling it." Kieran, for his part, was having a parallel conversation with Deb, his lawyer, his oldest friend, and the only person alive who was permitted to say things like, "Kieran, come on and have it register." "She gave you a granola bar," Deb said. "An excellent one." "Kieran. She also told me which fork to use on my own aircraft, and then apologized for it without anyone making her." Deb set down her pen. So what you're telling me is you've fallen for a woman who thought you were broke. I'm telling you she was the only person on that flight who noticed I hadn't eaten. He looked at the window. No calculation, just noticed. Don't blow it, Deb said finally. Not planning to. You always have a plan. Sometimes the plan is the problem. He thought about that for the better part of a week. It was a Tuesday in February. This was becoming a theme when things finally moved. Laurel was running a workshop with 15 junior attendants at the Ashmore training facility in Mississauga, walking them through what she'd started calling the actual human moment. The small, unscripted thing no service script could fully account for. She had them describe the last time a stranger had been kind to them for no visible reason. Kieran slipped in quietly at the back to observe. She didn't know he was there until after. He found her in the corridor, still slightly charged from the energy of the session, her notes in one hand. That exercise, he said, where did it come from? Laurel hesitated. A flight, she said, last October. He waited. I gave a passenger a granola bar, she said, and he looked at it like he hadn't been handed something small and ordinary in a very long time. She looked up. It stayed with me. I wasn't sure why. I know why, Kieran said quietly. They stood in the corridor in the particular silence that is not empty at all. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to know that however you answer, nothing about your position changes. That's already settled. This is separate. She waited. Would you want to have dinner? He said. Not a debrief, not a working session. Dinner. Laurel looked at him for a long moment. The beard he'd grown back over the winter, the calm blue-gray eyes, the worn-in quality of him that no amount of money had quite smoothed away. I have a condition, she said. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Somewhere ordinary, no rooftop situation, real food. I know a noodle place, he said, near the Vancouver layover hotel. I looked up what was in walking distance of where my crew stays over. I wanted to know what that felt like. Laurel blinked. You read the crew accommodation reports? I read everything. She laughed, surprised into it, the real kind, the kind she couldn't have managed deliberately if she'd tried. All right, she said, dinner. By spring, the Ashmore Airways Passenger Experience Initiative had been covered in 3 Canadian business publications. All of them noted the unusual choice to put a working flight attendant at the center of a major service overhaul. One profile asked Laurel what had prompted the program. We had the mechanics right, she said. We were missing the human part. That's not something you can consult your way into. The journalist pressed. But how did it start? Laurel considered the question. A granola bar, she said, and a very misplaced confidence. It ran as written. 700 Ashmore Airways employees read it. Most of them had been through her workshops and understood exactly what she meant without needing the context. Kieran framed the article, not at the office where people would ask questions, but at home on a shelf in the kitchen of his place near the lake in Toronto. Deb saw it on a Sunday in April and offered her complete assessment in 4 words. You're in trouble, Ashmore. I know, he said. Good trouble? The best kind. His phone buzzed. A message from Laurel, a photo of the Vancouver noodle restaurant menu sent with the caption, Still open. You still owe me spring rolls. He typed back, on my way. He put the phone in his pocket and looked out at the lake, where the ice had broken 3 weeks ago, and the water was shifting from its winter gray towards something warmer. Ordinary details he had learned, a granola bar from a uniform pocket, a fork on a tray table, a menu photographed in a restaurant where nobody knew who he was, were not small at all. They were, in the end, everything.